There we are. I am the Assistant Regional Inspector General for Audit in the Gulf Coast region, and basically I'm an audit supervisor, so if you're ever notified that you are, there's going to be an audit starting at your agency, you will almost always see an audit supervisor, an auditor in charge, and assist auditors. At times you will see the regional inspector generals for audit, like Nikita. She's basically the audit manager. So today we'll go over what is HUD's Office of Inspector General. A lot of times, a lot of the agencies don't know who we are until you receive a notification letter. Well, I want to clarify that we're from the Office of Audit side. Office of Investigations does not send a notification. They don't send a letter. If someone appears at your agency and say that they're from HUD's Office of Inspector General, Office of Investigations, then you have some problems. We come friendly. We let you know when we're coming. And almost always it's a friendly visit. So we'll go over what the Office of Inspector General is, how OIG assists HUD. Tanil went over that briefly. We'll talk about what is an auditee, how we select auditees, the type of audits, and audit resolution. Okay, so what is HUD OIG? The Inspector General Act was enacted in October 1978, and it created Inspector Generals in 12 of the largest federal agencies. So most agencies have an Office of Inspector General, and we authorize 73 statutory IGs, and it's the cornerstone of the IG's mission to have sort of a watchdog. So we're basically the agency that oversees HUD's and their activities, even though we work collaboratively, if that makes sense. Our office reports to Congress, and they also monitor us. GAO, we have peer reviews of our agency. We also have what they call management assistance reviews, so we're not going without being looked at either. So we serve under the general supervision of an agency head, which would be the Secretary of HUD, but we are an independent agency. We have dual reporting relationships to the department head, which is HUD, and to Congress. And we also have the Council of Inspector Generals on Integrity and Efficiency. Our mission, like I said earlier, is to conduct independent and objective audits and investigations. We're from audit. A lot of times our investigations begin with complaints. A lot of times they begin with referrals from our office. Those you won't know about during an audit. So if we're conducting an audit and we identify possible criminal activity, then we'll refer that over to the Office of Investigations. Our general mission is to prevent fraud, waste, and abuse, promote economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. We also review pending legislation and regulation. So a lot of times, a lot of legislation that comes out regarding HUD's programs, we'll review it and give our input on those, on that legislation and regulation before it is issued. We also keep the agency head and Congress informed. So here it is. Inspector Generals, I know that it's your grant and they're your files and we're coming in your building, but we are authorized to access all records and information of the agency. So any person that has received 1 penny of HUD funds are subject to audit and review. We conduct audits and criminal investigations, and if you tell us no for records and documents, we just issue a subpoena. It's just easier to give it to us. But we do have some people that refuse to give us documents, and we have to issue a subpoena, which we don't like to issue subpoenas, but we will in the spirit of conducting our audit. We also hire staff and control budget resources. And as far as the records and documents, what I can say is that if you don't have it, just say you don't have it. Don't try to make it up. Don't delay and give it to us 2 weeks later. It's only for the purpose to assist us in completing our audit sooner. So the sooner you give us what we ask for, the sooner we're out of your hair. Okay? This is our organizational chart. We just received or got a new Inspector General. His name is David Montoya. He started recently, I believe, was it January? It was January. At this point, he doesn't have a Deputy Inspector General, so he's been rotating some of the agency management. Right now, at the time when we submitted our presentation, it was Randy McGinnis, but now it's Brian Howe. You can see that he is now playing a dual role as a counsel to the Inspector General and also the acting Deputy Inspector General. Randy McGinnis is the Assistant Inspector General for Audit. So he manages all of the audit offices in the nation. You also have John McCarty. He is the Assistant Inspector General for Investigations. He's over all of the investigators in the organization. And we have Helen Albert. She's the Assistant Inspector General for the Office of Management and Policy. And basically in that department, they're responsible for the administrative business of the office. These are our regional offices. In parentheses, you'll see OI. Those are regional offices where they just have Office of Investigations. So in those that are without OI in parentheses, there are regional offices of audit and investigations. In New Orleans, we do have investigations that is in the same office with us. Okay. Just to give you a little history, before Hurricane Katrina, we were in New Orleans. We were under Region 6 out of Fort Worth, Dallas, and we basically audited all of HUD's programs. We did public housing, we did single family, we did multifamily, we did CDBG programs, we did home. After Hurricane Katrina, along with all of the rest of the legislation, we were tasked with overseeing the hurricane disaster relief funds. After that, it became any disaster that happened, we were responsible for overseeing those funds. So that was the establishment of the Gulf Coast region to be the focal point for all audits in the coming years. I know for sure that we visited Mississippi in the back. Hello, Mississippi. And we've also visited Louisiana because that was one of the largest programs was the Road Home program. So we've been in those areas. In the Gulf Coast region, there's Nikita Irons. She's the audit manager. We also have an audit supervisor, Kimberly Sandifer. She's in Jackson, Mississippi, and she has 2 auditors that work there. I'm in New Orleans. I have 3 auditors in New Orleans and 2 auditors in Baton Rouge. So we basically, myself and my staff basically cover all of Louisiana, but we also go wherever we're needed. Okay, how do we assist HUD? When we're developing our audit plan, we attempt to align it with HUD's plan. So if they're identifying specific areas of issues, then we'll try to align our audit plan with theirs in order to assist them with improving their programs. So in that, we help them in resolving their issues, and they have some major management challenges that they identify in their plan, and we align our audit plan with those. Okay, so these are the benefits to HUD for the Office of Inspector General. We do an independent examination of program operations. I know a lot of times HUD can issue, they'll issue a monitoring report. And those are where they issue the monitoring report, they look at a specific area, and they issue recommendations. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have to respond to HUD's recommendations, because you have to address the recommendations that they give, but you have to respond to our recommendations. So it's an independent examination, and it gives HUD more bang for the buck. And a lot of times when we look at some of the programs that HUD does not have the resources to look at, so we assist them in that way. So we do follow professional audit and investigative standards. We issue public reports. We quickly respond to help stem program fraud and abuse, and we also provide technical advice as new plans are developed by HUD. So these are our activities, and they're in line with our objectives to promote economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, deter and detect fraud, waste, and abuse in HUD's operations, and to ensure compliance with applicable laws and regulations. Okay, what is an auditee? I touched on that a little bit, and it includes a person or business. It's basically anyone that receives HUD funds. So if we're auditing an agency, for instance, we went over to the state of Louisiana to audit their road home program, we can also contact all the way down to the beneficiary that received those funds in order to conduct our audits. So anyone that receives a penny of HUD funds is subject to audit or investigation. Okay, how do we select audits and auditees? We definitely don't pick on people. So a lot of our audits are developed through discussions with HUD. Believe it or not, HUD will come to the IG's office and say, hey, we believe there's some improprieties going on in this program. Can IG look at it? Sometimes that's in the form of a conversation. Sometimes it's in the form of an actual letter, and we'll initiate an audit that way. Complaints. Somebody didn't get as much money as their neighbor, and they believe that the state isn't administering the program fairly or correctly, or it may be a disgruntled employee. Sometimes we get employees that are call in and will meet us at the door and say, well, here's the documentation you need to support what I was telling you over the phone. So we do have people that call us to come in and conduct audits. Congressional requests, we'll get requests from congressmen, congresswomen, reviews of proposed legislation, regulations, and other HUD issuers, and high-risk programs. Now, the disaster programs are high-risk programs because of the amount of money that's going out and the time period that it has to be spent. So those are considered high-risk programs. So this is what I was saying a few minutes ago, the focus on the supplemental funding, the programming amounts, the inherent risks related to fraud, waste, and abuse, and the congressional and presidential interests in those programs. Actually, we were mandated by Congress to look at those funds, the disaster funds. And sometimes you do have fraud, waste, and abuse in those programs because a lot of times it's not on purpose, but because you're trying to implement the program so quickly and get the money out the door, sometimes you make mistakes. So now Makita will go over the types of audits and the day in the life of an auditee.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm going to try to make this fast. I'm not sure about the rest of you all, and hoping you can hear me, but I'm about to pass out. I'm extremely hot. So I'm going to try to wrap this up. Okay, the different types of audits, there's really two. We consider internal and external audits. Internal audits is when we do an audit of HUD as a whole, and then external audits is when we look at the external, which will be the state of Louisiana, Mississippi Development Authority, any subrecipients or contractors who have received HUD funding. When we're looking at internal audits, some of the things we look at is participant eligibility or management oversight. The different type of objectives, and keep in mind this is just not a full list, but just some of the major things, objectives we look at. proper determination of participant eligibility, implementation of controls to prevent duplicate and fraudulent payments, and provision of adequate management oversight. For external audits, we focus on participant eligibility also, monitoring oversight of subrecipients and contractors, implementation of internal controls, national objectives, eligibility of costs, and compliance with grant agreements. The objectives would be proper determination of participant eligibility, grantee monitoring of subrecipients or their contractors to ensure provision of services, their policies and procedures developed in accordance with HUD rules and regulations, implementations also of systems controls, and eligibility for costs. Some of our common audit findings, and number one is one of the ones we have most about, as Tracy mentioned earlier, is lack of supporting documentations for disbursements. We have that's one of our major number one audit findings. Is usually there's no support, there's lack of support, there's missing support, and as Tracy stated earlier, a lot of times you have to recreate the documents, or you find the documents later, or you state in the beginning we don't have them, and then at that point we have to either subpoena them or request the costs, and then in the end you're actually given an opportunity when we go through the whole end process to provide us the documents. So usually most of the time that recommendation goes away. The other one is grants funds are not used in accordance with federal requirements or state or local regulations. Usually that's when you've used it, there's ineligible costs. So usually that one pretty much stays. There's also a lack of administrative capacity to carry out the grant. We found that in a lot of our NSP, when we first started looking at those type of audits, that there was a lack. The grantee did not have the capacity to actually administer the program. And one of the other ones is lack of grantee management oversight, and that's usually when the grantee has subrecipients or contractors, and they're not actually managing the contractor. Also, poor allocation, which would be excessive salaries of employees, use of grant funds for expenses that are not included in approved grants approved by HUD, that's also considered ineligible. And then we've had a couple of instances where there's been conflicts of interest. Audit resolution. This is how the audit findings usually get resolved. We try to keep the auditee informed from the beginning to the end. As Tracy mentioned earlier, you're going to get a notification letter letting you know that we're going to start the audit, or you get a telephone call requesting an entrance conference date and time. Once we come on board, we start what is considered our survey phase. During the survey phase, we've presented you our objectives, our audit period, and our scope that we're looking at. We try to do update meetings throughout this process, because by the time we finish survey, we either make a decision if we're going to go into what's considered the audit phase at that point. At that time, you should be presented with preliminary findings from the auditor, and letting you know that we're either going into the audit phase or we're closing out in the survey phase. If we decide to go into the audit phase, then a discussion draft is written, and then we will discuss the findings at the exit conference. But once before we get to the exit conference, you should be pretty aware of what our preliminary findings are at that point. Once you're given the draft report, you're allowed to provide us with comments on the finding. Depending on the type of report, you're usually allowed 15 days from the date of the draft report to provide your comments. The report is going to be addressed to HUD, because HUD is actually that's who we provide all of our audit reports to, and they're going to be the ones who's actually responsible for ensuring that the auditee implements whatever recommendations that we've made. Also, as stated, HUD is responsible for resolving the recommendations. And what I mean by that, once we provided the recommendation, HUD is going to work with the grantee or the auditee in implementing the recommendations. They will have 120 days from the date of the report to come back to us to give us either they agree with our recommendations or they disagree. If they agree, then they should be working with the auditee on how to implement those recommendations. So I would encourage anyone who receives an audit that you work with HUD throughout the whole process. Once we've gone through the draft findings, the final report, and if you've agreed whatever we've recommended, you should be at that point determining how you're going to resolve those recommendations. Because HUD only has 120 days to get back to us. And then by 180 days, we should have a clear understanding as this what's going to go forward. But you have a year to implement the recommendations, to get them resolved and corrected at that point in time. Some of the possible audit resolutions outcomes. Although we do not have anyone here from Office of Investigations, one of the things is there can be criminal referrals. If we determine or we suspect that there's any fraud while we're conducting our audits, we do make referrals to investigations. And as Tracy stated earlier, that's the last thing you want is investigations showing up knocking on your door. The other thing is the Program Fraud Civil Remedies Act. Usually we would do civil referrals. So not only will we consider as IG as a whole anyone going to jail, but then we're also going to hit you in your pocketbook. So not only will we ask that money be paid back to the program, if fraud has been determined, it will also be considered we request that you pay back money out your pocket. The other thing can be civil money penalties, debarments or suspensions, and then we also enter into what's called repayment agreements. Let's say the auditee, you don't have a lot of non-federal funds to pay back. If there's been found that any monies needs to be paid back to the program because the program was not implemented or run in the way that it should have been, then you will work out repayment agreements with HUD to pay. And sometimes they can go 2 years, 5 years, 20 years, 30 years, it's whatever that HUD works out with the auditee and implement a repayment agreement that's fair and in the best interest of the auditee. Also, one of the recommendations would be to develop and implement adequate internal controls to try to help moving this process along the next time, that it does not reoccur. And I know a lot of people may not think this, but we do issue audit reports saying recognition for a job well done and that there were no findings. We actually have someone in the audience. Al, didn't you receive a positive audit report? That's right. There you go. Also, if you'd like to get more information on any audits that we've conducted, they're in our semi-annual report to Congress. Please visit our website at hudoig.gov and look under semi-annual reports to Congress. Oh, sorry, I went backwards. Also, as Tracy mentioned, we do accept any complaints, and they can come, they come from everywhere, from HUD, from citizens, from auditees, grantees, whomever. Please contact our hotline. Unfortunately, with everyone else, we're going through a budget crunch. So only they're accepting complaints Tuesday and Thursdays from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. So, hey, you can get in during that time.
I'm going to talk about the OIG audit from the perspective of the grantee. We have been audited twice, and we're still working on resolving our audit issues. I'm going to talk about the process that we've gone through. She's just discussed much of this, but from our perspective, what it looked like to be audited by the OIG, who you work with at each step in the process. And then I'll go through very specifically what the findings were, what a management decision is, who you work with for the management decision, and kind of the status of where we are to date. So the process for an OIG audit from our standpoint, at the beginning feels very much like your field office or your disaster recovery. You're notified that they're coming, and they may be asking for files in your office. They may be interviewing your staff, or in our case, Cedar Rapids received a large percentage of our disaster dollars, and at both both audits. They spent considerable time at the City of Cedar Rapids and going through their files. We also had an exit conference, and we as grantees can provide verbal comments at that time. OIG issues a draft report, and the grantee can respond to that in writing. The important thing that I want to mention here is these are all like formal documents that become public documents, and so it's important that if you have something to say or you don't agree, that you do put that in writing, because that gets attached to the report, and it's kind of your own trail there. From that point, we worked with the disaster recovery staff. We worked with them in terms of what we agreed with, what we didn't agree with, and they then issued a management decision. So that's something that our HUD disaster recovery worked with. We did not work directly with OIG at that point. So you don't have to work with OIG at that point. HUD works with them. But you are responsible to resolve the audit issues, and our HUD disaster office also worked with us on sort of the timing of getting those issues resolved. Let's see. So I think that's all I really want to say about the process. Let's go into what the audits actually were. Again, we were audited twice, and I will say that the first business program we rolled out, we had a HUD OIG office visit not too long after we had dispersed those funds. It was kind of quick out the door, and OIG was quick in our door right behind them. And this is also true of our second business program. It's a business rental assistance program. We had begun dispersing those funds, and it wasn't too long after that we got a monitor. And I don't know if that just happened like that, or if HUD sort of, OIG actually takes a look at the money going out the door and whether you're monitoring and things like that. So the first audit was on our Jumpstart Business Program. I think Meredith described that a little bit this morning. It is a program for businesses that were flood affected and received an offer of an SBA disaster loan or bank loan. The funding was 25% of the loan amount, and to be used for working capital up to $50,000. What HUD found, OIG found, was that, and they did go out to the City of Cedar Rapids, and they did an initial review, and then they came back, and I think they spent a couple of months in Cedar Rapids, and they looked through all 406 files, business files that we had for this program. And they found that 300 of the 406 did not have supporting eligibility. And this is right in line with what you all were talking about in terms of what you look for. So they were saying either this was not a business at the time of the flood, or they were saying we expected to see executed loan documents in the files. We didn't find those. Or there were some instances where the rules say you provide funds for 25% of the loan amount, and they found that there were funds provided in excess of that. But the effect of that, so that's sort of what they found, but the effect of that is that the finding was that we misspent over $10 million of disaster funds. I'll go through a little bit later sort of how we resolved that. But essentially, most of the money was tied up in the difference between what we expected, and our rules weren't clear. So, but we expected that the businesses had approval bank approval letters, commitment letters, and not actual executed loan documents. So that was something that was not clear, was not our intent, and we did need to shore up. The second finding was that we didn't do a duplication of benefits, and indeed we had not. We hadn't done a duplication of benefits on this program. We'd contacted SBA, and at that point, that's really what we thought we had to do. We had this link with SBA, and other than that, we were not doing a duplication of benefits. So our response, again, this is our written response to the findings, was that, well, first of all, we disagreed with HUD about the misspent $10 million. And we really felt that OIG's comments implied a much greater neglect than what was actually going on. Again, we did resolve this by doing a rule change, and we also had to change our action plan. But I think the lesson there is that we really need to look at what we're saying in our rules and know what we mean, because it didn't say what we meant to say. In terms of the duplication of benefits, we totally agreed. We were not only not doing it, we weren't quite sure what we were doing or what we needed to do. So the management decision that was written, and this then is the recommendation that went to the OIG from HUD in terms of what we needed to do. We needed to provide documentation to support the $10 million that was misspent or reimbursed with non-federal funds. Again, we changed our action plan, our rules to better clarify. I do think that this says the finding is open. I kind of think this one is closed, and that mainly because it's documentation, and we are paying back some funds or recapturing some funds, but I don't think that was part of this finding. The second part of the finding was to perform monitoring. We have gone out and monitored this program and all of our programs at this point. So that finding is closed. And the other recommendation on the duplication of benefits for all the 406, we had to develop subrogation agreements, affidavits. We had to go back out to all these businesses. We had to recontact the SBA, the insurance companies. We researched Chamber of Commerce's. What did they provide? Just because a business would write down that they got funds from the Chamber of Commerce and for what purpose, we also had to go back out and verify is that indeed the purpose that the Chamber provided the funds, as well as sometimes they were private foundations. So we had an awful lot of research to do on our part, in addition to getting all of this extra documentation out to businesses that already had their money. So that was a challenge. The final recommendation is to repay anything that has been duplicated. Like I said, we are in the process of recapturing funds at this point. For the first program, the Jumpstart Business Program, we have an amazingly small amount of businesses that either we couldn't get duplication of benefits on, or that they were actually not a business at the time of the flood, or in some way not eligible. And I think I looked before we came, and I think it was 12 that we have left to go back out of 406, and I think that's pretty good. The next audit issue, the second audit, was on our second business program, which is the Business Rental Assistance Program. And this was assistance. It was to get businesses back into the flood-damaged buildings. It was a program that gave 6 months of rent for businesses that had a 1-year market rate lease. When HUD audited, they found, well, first of all, we hadn't monitored, and we hadn't. But more specifically on our market rate lease analysis, what they found was that we did not provide guidance to our subgrantees on how to do a market rate lease analysis and how to look for identity of interest issues. And that would be, I am a building owner, and I own that building, but I also own a business, and I rent from myself. So usually two separate tax ID numbers, but we weren't bringing those forward in terms of documenting them in the file, and they noted that. So for our management decision, we were asked to provide documentation of a 1-year market rate lease analysis, and what we did was we went to each of our administrators and talked to them about how to do a market rate lease analysis. We never thought about it, but and the other thing we had to think about is, what is a 1-year lease? We had some that rented from month to month, but they've been renting for 3 years. Is that a one? So we had to be, we had to really hone down in terms of our guidelines and what did we really mean when we said 1-year market rate lease analysis. The other finding was, again, the duplication of benefit. Oh, let me just say that the first one is still open, and duplication of benefits, again, this is about, these audits were just a few months apart, and we had not conducted duplication of benefits. So the market rate lease analysis, duplication of benefits, those findings are closed. Our grant administrators have done a great job, along with, we have weekly meetings to say, where are you in terms of getting the duplication of benefits taken care of, or contacting your business to get additional information in terms of eligibility. So, oh, I didn't even do the slide. Okay. Lessons learned. I think this is a lesson that all of us know, but it's really hard when you're trying to get money out the door to also monitor. And we all do the best we can, but monitoring is important, and we find things when we go out. I was talking to our staff earlier. I don't, however, think that if we had gone out and monitored the rental assistance program, that we would have had a clue that these weren't market rate leases, and that we should have asked them to do an analysis. I mean, that's how OIG brought that to our attention, but I'm not sure that monitoring would have actually taken care of that finding. We have learned, though, again, these are our first 2 business programs, and we had many business programs. So we began to really scrutinize every single word of our guidance and our guidelines, and to say, what does 1 year mean? What is a market rate lease? What is an eligible business? What kind of documentation will we accept or not accept? So, I mean, that really was a big lesson for us, and I think it has helped us as we went forward to be monitored early and have our program scrutinized, because I think the subsequent programs are much better, and we know the documentation that's needed at every turn. The other important part, and I think we've talked about it, is that you can respond to those audit reports, and there's a trail. It's in the final report. It was pretty scary to have misspent $10 million. But I guess what I want to say is these issues can be resolved, and I mean, we've gone from $10 million to we'll probably have, I don't know, $250,000, $300,000 maybe that'll have to come back, and maybe some of that will get resolved as well. The other thing is that, do you publish the final report? Is that somehow, okay, they publish it. Well, we didn't know they published it. And we knew what the findings were, we knew, and neither did our director, and neither did our governor, and neither did. So this was like blasted all over the newspapers, and we didn't know it was coming. So recommendation I would give you all is let your folks know when you're going to publish that, because it really caught us off guard. The other thing we learned is that in terms of duplication of benefits, although we didn't quite know what we were doing, SBA and HUD also had conflicting views on the duplication of benefits. And then we had a business community that was saying, whoa, we need to pay down our SBA loans, and why would private loans be a DOB and SBA loans are not, and what about bridge loans? And it was just like, oh, we need some guidance here. So thank you to HUD for really working with us through that, and then also providing guidance. So again, it's an arduous process. We've been going through this for 2.5 years, trying to get our findings resolved, but I think we have 4 of the 6 findings are resolved, and what is left is actually recapturing funds. So we have both the City of Cedar Rapids and the state have finalized the recapture policies, and so probably within the next couple of months we'll begin those collection processes. So.
We will have an opportunity for questions as well. I'd just like to speak for a few moments, though, to the role of the HUD CPD program office, whether it's the grantees that we manage right out of our offices and headquarters in disaster recovery, or the CPD program offices that are working with you, the grantees, as well. The first is that we actually have an interest in resolving audits. Just as you feel like this is the worst thing that could happen to you, we don't love this either. Because consider this is a program risk as well. So when these audits are issued and there are findings, it's a reflection as well as work that we have to do with our program. Even though the issues may be local, it is something that's reflective of our program administration. Points that I'd like to highlight, though, in terms of our role, because we have an interest in resolution, we are working with the grantees to not only address the recommendation, and here's sort of the great mystery or unknown fact. I like Nikita and Tracy. We don't always agree. And when we don't agree, it's the program office's job to make that known to the IG and to state our reasons why, and to recommend an alternative recommendation. Here's what we see may be the issue. It's not quite what you've pointed out, and here's how we believe it should be addressed. And then we're back on the same page. There are those very tiny limited circumstances where we don't agree, and those are pushed beyond, as you all call it, well above many of the pay grades that you know of. But for most of the issues, we can come to a middle ground so that we can resolve those issues. So then let's talk about a point that Peggy brought up, which is in that resolution process, that management decision, that memo that HUD is issuing back to the IG stating this is what the grantee has agreed to do. We've worked with them. We don't just commit grantees to things that they don't know they need to do. We've negotiated that with you, walked you through those, and now we're telling the IG what will happen. They have an opportunity to review and comment or agree and disagree, and then from that point is when the clock on your 1-year implementation of those actions begins. And I want to point out a time frame. When the audit report is issued, we have a certain amount of time to respond. We may ask for additional documentation from the grantees, as well as you will have some time to act. Please adhere to those time frames. They're not there just to be arbitrary. There is an actual goal of resolution and implementation for each of these. And so the documentation that you may have that may support what's going forward or what you'll need to collect. Keep in mind at this point, we're just trying to give them an idea of what's going to happen next. How are we going to resolve it? Not the actual resolution itself. We're not there yet. So please adhere to those time frames. The other point that Peggy brought up is documentation is critical. as most of you at this point have been monitored for any one of your CPD programs, you know that documentation is critical. You may not love it that you get cited, if you will, for concern or a finding because it's not clear, or you didn't have this voucher, or these were out of order, or it doesn't appear that they're anywhere except hidden in the basement behind your custodial team. There's a reason why we make those documentation concerns and findings. It's a preview to an audit, quite frankly. And if you hear us saying those in your monitoring reports, let that be an opportunity for you to take a look at your own internal controls, your documentation. Keep in mind, we don't work with you side by side. All we have is what you have on paper and what the interviews with you tell us. And so if you're not telling us so we can hear it and we can't see it in paper, we don't know what's going on. There's only one conclusion we can draw. We don't know. Lack of clarity or the absence of documentation says something is amiss. And you may not be doing anything wrong, but there's nothing to show what you are doing. And quite frankly, I think a few of you are saying, well, I work too hard not to have any documentation, so I know you're going back to do that. The last is, one of the things that we're noticing increasingly is your role in monitoring your subgrantees. Your subgrantees can, quite frankly, get you in trouble too. And so your efforts at monitoring are critical. You may have wonderful records demonstrating your administration of programs. Your subgrantees may not have the same concern or identification of risk, quite frankly, and so their documentation and internal controls may not be as strong as yours. Help them build that capacity, or consider looking at other subgrantees that can address the recovery needs of your community. With that, I'll open it up to questions. Ooh, everybody got us. All right, here we go. Lisa?
Hold on. I can't run over to that.
On the slides, common audit findings, one of the words that stands out to me as an example is excessive salaries. Can you define what excessive means?
That's a good one.
Well, generally, an excessive salary, if you have a janitor, you should not be paying a janitor $200,000 per year to clean up. So if you're spending the bulk of your grant funds in salaries, and the purpose of the funds is to benefit the program recipients, what the funds were put out there before, and a lot of times we'll base excessive salaries on trends, what the rates are, the federal wage rates, and that sort of thing. So you should not, like I said, I know that's a little extreme, but sometimes you'll find where secretaries or program monitors are making more than the executive directors, and that immediately sends up a red flag to us. But I just want to make one general comment. When administering the grant funds, when you receive these grant funds and you sign that grant agreement, that means that you're responsible for those funds. So I will take as much care and responsibility for those grant funds as you would with your own personal funds. Let me clarify, don't use it as your personal funds, but take as much care as your personal funds. So for instance, I have 2 children. I get paid. That's my grant. My children are my sub-grantees. I'm not going to give my children $10 and say just go on off and do whatever you're going to do. I'm going to go and I'm going to check behind to make sure that what they've done with those funds is in line with what I want done with those. So I just want to,
I just have I actually have an example where a grantee got on a draft audit a finding of excessive salaries. And we all had a learning curve on this one because it was New York, and we were dealing with salaries that most of us had never seen because some of the staff had been brought over from Goldman Sachs. And for huge cuts in the salaries that they had been getting before. And what the IG and the HUD office worked out as the corrective action, was that they went and got comparables for what salaries were in comparable kinds of organizations to the Development Corporation where the salaries were. So we went and asked in New York the Port Authority and some of the other big development corporations, what are you paying at these like kind of positions? And it turned out that our grantee was actually in line. But they came up as part of the corrective action was to come up with a table of salaries and to check it periodically. But they were very high salaries. It was kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah, I have another comment, but it goes to the other side, not the audit side, but to the criminal side. We do see that activity. There are individuals, there are elected officials, there are mayors that have been and are currently under indictment for fraud, embezzlement, and when you have large volumes of funds going into small and medium-sized cities, a lot of people have a lot of cousins, they own a lot of land. You know, there are a finite number of interests in these towns and cities and these neighborhoods, and you need to be very aware of and be proactive to identifying conflicts of interest, as well as other things that that may be going on. You know your communities best. You know who the big landowners are and what their relationships are and this and that. But so be very aware of conflict of interest as well.
Hi. You had given a lot of examples of when an audit is triggered by a third party. What percentage of your audits are actually not triggered by a third party, but are just part of your proposed, I guess, schedule of audits?
That's hard. That's kind of a hard question to answer, because a lot of times different regions do different risk analysis. Now, we don't take every complaint. We do, if someone calls in and they say Susie is stealing money, we do look at into it initially, and we don't chase after everything that's sent in. I mean, we've had some outrageous, requests, but we do look at those first. But basically and I want to go back to what Peggy was speaking on, is that we came through the door right after they signed, the ink wasn't dry on the grant agreement yet. Well, the difference with the disaster funds is that these are programs that will probably never happen again. So once the money is gone, I know Louisiana had a lot of 2-year programs. Some of the programs were 3 years. So the idea of us coming in while you're kind of building a plane while it's in the air is to ensure that those funds are spent up front correctly. Because after the program is over, the only recommendations that we could give, if that is a recommendation, is for you to repay money. We can't issue recommendations on revising or implementing policies because the program is over. So that's the idea of us coming in while those funds are being spent. But I hope I answered your question. We do risk analysis as well as the complaint. So sometimes it's based upon a dollar amount. In the case of the disaster funds, it's the quick implementation and the quick turnaround of programs and the issuance of the money. And I also wanted to say one thing about the PIFCRA. You have to be very careful as a grantee and even as a person when you're signing those forms to receive funds, because you're basically certifying that you are receiving those funds for what you're supposed to be receiving them for, and what you're signing is true and correct. And I'll just give you an example. We have a lot of road home participants that were subject to the PIFCRA, and basically what it says is that you signed something, even if you didn't know, even if you didn't read the document, once you sign something, it means that you are aware of what you signed, just like with any contract. Well, one of the stipulations in the Louisiana Road Home Funds was that you own the home. So we've had a lot of persons that may have sold their homes, which was perfectly within the program rules and regulations. If you had sold your home, you had to go through another process. But we've had people that have signed forms that said they own the home, and that triggered a civil referral for program fraud. So like Nikita mentioned, not only do you have to repay those funds, you also have to pay for each certification. So if you have a 10-page document and 10 pages are signed, then for each one of those signatures, you have to pay, I believe, is $7,500 in addition to what you were not supposed to receive. So you have to be very careful when you're putting the money out the door when you receive these HUD funds.
The one thing I will note, and I see one last question in the back as we go towards break, the role of recapture. And so many of these cases or examples that you're hearing, even from some of the folks who are presenting, involve finding out that someone perhaps received additional benefits later that duplicated what you provided as a grantee, or in fact were not truthful with you. So indeed what they put on paper said so, but come to find out there's something there. And so grantees have recourse. They can go after those funds. As those who have done recapture have found, that takes time. You have to find them, and believe it or not, they are not going to come forth just because you ask nicely. And so finding them, going through with your attorneys, that takes time. And that may be a reason the audit resolution also takes time, because your recapture process does take time. And it's you may want it to go quickly, but that is a process that you need to build in. The last question in the back.
Oh, I just had a comment for Tracy. Hi, Tracy.
Hi.
Tracy says she visits. She doesn't visit, she lives. She lived with us for a year and a half. So sometimes when they say they visit, they really live with you, and you have to donate enough office space for them to live with you for a year and a half. And sometimes that office space is more than the office space that you have for your own staff. Is that right, Tracy? Tell the truth.
That's when you have multiple programs.